but unto so ultimately that inasmuch as I am, therefore, absent of blood biases, or loyalty to long or short, or near or far descendancy, one ought not to read superlative racism if it should both best describe her and more appease my resentment to remark that she was one of these gross cave trolls, the practitioner at the plasma center, a woeful mold of womanhood, in common to these parts, which trudged her lumbering ogrekin bulk from off some sty south of that grand southern river, which river is grand, if you ask me, hint hint, for the grand separation, of course, that it provides between the southern extremity of one northern peoples and the northern extremity of another peoples by cartography southern. Breathing heavily all her long way, I'm sure, up north, unto this swelling Aurora region, which region, as implied by its name, is Aurora, like the morning, and morning, like sickness. And beware, for blasphemy, blasticists here, in these sordid municipal clusters of this western Chicagoland suburbia, where they build Little Mexico, where they procure a new place for the Pope's paternity, where they set up base for the Rome and Armageddon that they seek to bring about, and which they hope looms over the horizon. For on some base level of human behavior and primitive emotional processing, racism is basically tantamount to clan warfare, just on demographic and so illogical scale. However, as I have no family or friends or lineage or people, I don't apply, but I'm neutral, or about as neutral as you're like to find. Today's, though, is strange racism, it seems, and somehow deluded, that as eager to be racist as some indeed are, some are just as hopeful to be racialized and to write someone a race ticket. Racism, it would seem, has become just another generic notion, cheapened in the mass production of this modern American experience, a tool of political propaganda, degraded of its device for its common claim, its convenient, timely, but always malleable manufacture, or rather, its plastic spontaneity, or surprise, or indignation, at its discovery, except for and towards its versatile value unto gainsay, to be prepared, like provender, having been procured, or passed along, or possessed, as the spoils of an enterprise, like unto mercenaries of a press for sale, and molded in measure of mass media, but meant to manipulate morons. Like a schematic, like a schematic now public domain, which requires no patent to produce, mostly obsolete but to basic purpose, and beyond the use of more sophisticated surmise. It's the dollar store flathead screwdriver that a little boy buys dad at Christmas, and what he'll buy when, as a grown man, he moves into his own place. Because little boys know that dads use tools, and young men have not but hate wherewith to honor their fathers. It splits the midline, that its turn loosens or strengthens associations and sentiments of binary. For all races hate all races, and a mature American knows this, and that whatever foolish things are blurted between friends and close company are things very different from political agenda based on hate. Yet sometimes it's necessary to pin the Fuhrer on the Nazi. It's all just misplaced anger, though, regardless. For what most cable subscribers fail to see is that sentiments divide on economic lines, not racial. And if you look like this and don't have a job, and he looks like them and does have a job, then fuck that guy and everyone that looks like him. More or less the standard mentality. Until you find a job, then among probably most men, I think by now, if he's being fair, not to himself as he always is, but of himself as he less often is, and cares not should his candor by his buddies be criticized, which hostility dissipates unto a polite indifference, so long as their different presence encumbers you not, and their different masculine subhuman other half isn't trying to fuck your daughter, And as woman's first trait is feminine, and man's his apparent demographic and socio-economy within. That racism is an wholly male construct, and women windswept and swept fallen by it. That women merely and can only but abide the anthropological parameters imposed by the time, place, and primacy of her power. For whenever could or has she or can she tell man to stop his brutality that he should obey, and unto males of another kind no less, when since our softer inception, and all throughout she's but glad for our dichotomy, that his present violence is not at her. This Generation Xbox also executing such drastic portion of his socialization through a nowhere platform of space-age internet gameplay, a faceless screen name medium, and an impersonal, unhuman exchange of game controller interaction, and so has distempered, at least as juxtaposed to all previous predecession, in its aversion towards pigment and parody, explicit aversion at any rate, and as the devil now also needs not, with our similar-faced smile, nor even this human face at all, but merely a modem, to sell perdition unto the souls he swindles, in the dark diocese of his data dogma. That racism ultimately drags back to industry, and industry is territory and boys' club rivalries, and has been since the tree limbs of Precambria. That when times are good, even still, this berry patch is ours and belongs to the chimps, and fuck those goddamn baboons. And when times are tough, then piss off any single other if you think you're grabbing part of my portion. And when times are bad and dismal, and tension heavy altogether, then I'll bet those goddamn lemurs stole the roots and bred bugs into our berry bushes. I say we kick those striped-tailed fucks out of the forest entirely. Or substitute an allegory of one's preference, yet the behavior is still animalistic. And this channel wants you to see a blackface on the villain, and this channel white. Tune in here for geopolitical fear. For holy war, we're always here, covering the day's crusade against the false god of that place there, yet all to divert attention away from the financial face of the thieving, greedy fiends, and hide the real foes which rob everyone blind unanimous and use race to misdirect the anger of idiots. As to, mankind is merely animalia, human, the reversed Levitical species, into which blood all animalia flows, to progress forward hominid, adhering allele to human face and form, that some individuals too bear their subsidiary zoology more blatantly than others, as some have dove's eyes or swan's neck, or that person looks mousy, she sleek of feature like vixen, or as my teeth have something more canine. And what more proof does one need of God's process evolution, but that the penguin bears geology geometric, and wears its oval build for the strength of arc structure, which architecture not only bears weight best, but holds heat most efficiently within the environment that inspired it. And the several sequence of natural selection, but that trait travels too through the stomach, that so predator is also shaped by its prey. Or are these common characteristics all coincidence when blind physics sculpts every snowflake special? But unto so, though, that humans bear all trait, in our primate or prowess. And here perhaps some would challenge and cite Sapiens' absent venom sac, at which instance I should only hope to contain my bullet points as here holstered at my hip, for that half humanity harbors an acidic ecology below the waist, which fluid in some is both foul and corrosive to house paint, and the other half stews eggs in a descended bladder, and the seminal slop secreted by so vastly many of these sweaty scrotum sacs is pernicious unto present society and civilization at large, and nature unanimous. Beyond dank orifice, though, the venom sac of the rest of our species simply tufted into cerebral tissue, and comprises now in so vastly many the frontal lobe, and the physical foreground to the abstract platform of human consciousness, as per at least the virulent character of the average person. And so, though, as man is only animal, and his swine come in all shades and from all places on the planet, one need not take offense, for I speak not of whole Espanol, but towards the grunt of one hog. And if a pig wishes it to cease that even a dog should take notice of her awful odor, then perhaps she ought to stop being so aggressively shitty. By her face as she approached, though I had never seen her before, I could tell she was having another bad day, or else a bad life, that even the corners of her lips were not beyond the burdensome labor of the world's weight, but were pulled down always by the gratuitous gravity of her great complaint. I could tell as well as that I wasn't winning this one. And it seems that, too, somehow I knew that my day was about to be made heavier, for that she had weight that she was looking to unload on somebody. And I have a particularly punchable face. Because that endorphins must be released, and the human endocrine is a strange deity, to be persuaded by behavior and spectrum so paradoxical, and by such wide conflicting range of rain dance rituals, entreated to give quench to mental heat, that the happier hormone of homeostasis in some is elicited by actions altruistic or pro-social inclusive or cooperative interactive, even ingestive or simply adrenaline fun dangerous, but not derogatory. And yet in others by causing grudge or spite or hostility, harm, or hate to someone else, and by behavior antisocial, inhumane, and anthro-cultural pathological. Perhaps I appear pugilist. Call it close to foresight, for as much as experience, both by propensity and prone to, gives not clear glass view, but educated guess to the outcome of present potential, and with predicate to postulation. And the more examples to ponder through, the wiser the surmise, and the more precise the prediction. And I've been given much exposure in terms of prior view, and I've seen this episode enough before, and I've seen this side many aforetime, that I've something clairvoyant to my conditioning and my accruing encounters, that the contextual aftertastes accrue appreciation, and the crowded accumulation of their common recurring consequence from the past give guidance in close detail to the foreground of current and coming context, that too I'm something of an authority on Caucasian shade of color-coded choler, for I incur anti-white hate like I caused it. And I shall call it anti-white, and not reverse, for it is not reverse, but exactly racism. And I've experienced the repercussion of prejudice towards many of my traits, and racially both its proclivity among the people of my progenitors, directed at me, because I harbored not the same hate in my heart, and its interracial reciprocity by other races than white, imposed upon me because white I am. And experience told me that the more that I should smile, the more offense that she would see in me, and treat me with hostility. With that in mind, I put on my meekest demeanor as I entered into the office, and an apologetic attitude, as though regretful that she should have been bothered to perform a routine duty of her job on my account. Upon sitting in the chair next to her desk, I stretched forth my hands, palms down, for her scrutiny. "Hi, Miss Montag. All my numbers were good. I just have dry skin on my knuckles, from working outside." Getting the last part in after a tiny hesitation, but that she might know that I work in the bitter blue collar and manually with my bare hands. Employment characteristics like those of virtually every male peer of her Hispanic social network. To say that she looked at, that is, gave examination to, my hands would be hyperbole. Glanced, still too exaggeration. After dipping her eyes downward slightly in their direction and giving them less than half a little glimpse, hardly polite enough to feign the endeavor of survey at all, she returned her eyes back up to mine, but in their same cold display, only the bottom eyelid open beneath the austere descended top. Her response was ironic, antithesis to the apology said by literal semantic. "I'm sorry, you can't donate today." In other words, I can, and so there's no possibility whatsoever, but I certainly will, and thusly am irreversibly and irrevocably deferring you. And as the situation is gray in shade, with no chance that I shall receive reprisal for your denial having made, there is absolutely nothing to me that you can say, by which you might otherwise persuade. Oh, and by that condescending, offensive, fake glimpse I gave, I meant go fuck yourself. And by I'm sorry, I meant that it only brightened my day to turn your wretched ass away. I entreated, though, with all the humanity that I might muster in me. "Miss, please, I'm not trying to be rude. If you'll just take a look." extending my hands now closer to her and curling my fingers that she might perceive proof of my point. These are not open wounds. The new skin is not shiny, and the epidermis is repairing in perfectly healthy fashion. At least this time she had the good grace to humor me, and gave my digits a full glance. But nonetheless, after that she did, and then again displacing her eyes dispassionately onto mine, she responded only with silence, staunch, and her face stiff as it was during the whole scene, unaltered throughout. And by one solitary blink, a single, practiced, disciplined blink, but more blatantly than she would blink otherwise, which unspoken proclamation expressed her refusal. Another moment in limbo, and I continued, in earnest now, my begging appeal. Please, ma'am, it's imperative. And as soon as I started saying it, I knew that imperative was the wrong choice of words. I should have just said I'm desperate. I was already pushing it with epidermis. Imperative could only be and must have been a terrible insult. For that polysyllabic words are painful the most, and polysyllabic, a different language than English altogether. That any lofty vocabulary is hateful even to native speakers, insomuch that the very use of the noun vocabulary, said within casual conversation, unto the average corn-fed, white bread, English-speaking American, approaches reproach, and would inspire respite within the heart of the hearer, if its average hearer were aware of an alternative word to which to compare it, and otherwise lexicon were not, on second thought, so thoroughly infuriating. And I'm usually more polite than to impose my more academic etiquette upon any immigrant regardless, for that the futility is my own, and it's only my stupidity that's shown if my use of language prevents an exchange from being accomplished. And in that also, it is never my intent that anybody, but particularly a person employed in the peripheral places of sterile socialization, a bank teller, for example, or a receptionist, or someone at the service counter, should ever, having from interacting with me, or because of my engagement, feel humiliated for having participated. And as I too, should I ever have need to emigrate unto Spanish sovereign, would hope that the people of my new populace would be better than to speak unto me their most eloquent Espanol, and then raise self-esteem by spitting on me that I could not comprehend them, when they could, and just as easily, speak with me simplistically, and there'd be no discrepancy. But as my dog Isaac is wise as to which dogs to sniff with caution, and so practices safety, and primarily with pit bulls, though he's become playful friends with some in his lifetime, for that some have snapped at him for sniffing, even so, as my husky is keen to the volatile proclivity of pit bulls, I'm usually more careful than to inflict linguistic wound needlessly upon her homely kind of womanhood, and her frowning pit bull visage, for I'm weary by now to trolls of her tint, that they quickly hear condescendence from handsome husky things like Isaac and me.